you might get a lot of different advice, conflicting advice from different sources.
Yeah.
And that can maybe tell you that there's definitely not a one size fits all there. But whatever you try doing, try it at least for a couple weeks. I totally agree.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is my third or fourth time. My name is Rahela Sami. I am one of the live instructors on 7Stage. And today joining me is Eric. Eric, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Really happy to be here. This is my second time only on the podcast. So kind of still a newbie at it. Excited to get talking. Yeah.
Well, welcome, Eric. Well, we have a fun topic today, and it's, I think, going to be a really interesting podcast. The topic is finding out what works for you.
Mm.
And the reason we're talking about it because there's so much general advice given out, but we know, and Eric and I were discussing it, is people have very different approaches, and you have to figure out what works for you. So Eric, what are some of your thoughts about this topic?
Yeah, I mean, so having, taught this test for a long time, and also my own experience studying for the test, I get this question a lot, right? And frankly, it's a big part of my job as a tutor, as an instructor, which is figuring out what works for me, what works for other people. And I think a general thing, Rahel, I think we can agree is a lot of it sometimes can be a bit trial and error.
It is.
But I'll speak a bit about my experience first. And I'm curious how you studied for the test too.
Sure.
So for me, I started with a couple different like book resources that kind of worked okay. I learned, some fundamentals. I gave it a few weeks, couple months overall. What I think really that I did that I wouldn't recommend necessarily to everyone is I took a lot of PTs very rapidly. For me, that worked pretty well. And I think a big part of that was that, my other obligations were I didn't really have that many. So I was taking like PTs every other day, or in some cases, 2 days in a row and the third day off. So like 4 PTs a week or so.
A lot.
Which, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Which if you talk to most people, you go to most sources, they would say, don't do that.
Yeah.
Um, and I would say to most people, don't do that. Please don't do that. Um, but but for me, the process of like practicing that stamina aspect in that way, and again, I didn't have much else I needed to use my brain for at the
Yeah.
time, so I could kind of just use it all for the LSAT and then just kind of zombie out for the rest of the day, and then just, like do the whole thing the next day. For me, I thought it was a good way to keep me engaged with the test
Yeah.
because I really kind of obsessed about the test while I was studying for it, which I guess was a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, so similar to you, I first started with some like Power Score books,
Mm.
like
Yeah,
ones
yeah.
I found them at like Barnes and Nobles, like bookshelf. That's it. That's how I studied for the SAT,
Mhm.
that's the way to ace it. Pretty quickly found out when I took another practice test after studying that was not going to be enough for me.
Mm.
I did try out one other company and I just didn't see the results I wanted to before switching to 7Sage. So I was the opposite of you, Eric. I joined a study group on 7Sage, and it actually produced I think all of them ended up being tutors later on.
Mm. Mhm.
Really good, intense study group. And we did one practice test a week. There was a lot of I would take it, I would blind review it, which would take me 2 days because I would write it out. And then I would do drilling based on whatever insights I learned about my weakness. I would review or drill, not just question type, but maybe even argument type, writing parallel arguments. So if I see it next time, I would recognize it better. And then take a section because sections to me are a reflection of how I'm going to do in a practice test.
Yeah.
Take
Mhm.
another section, and then I would take a practice test. And maybe the reason I started so differently was because I just encountered a group that was already in 170s. I was in,
Yeah.
and so I think they were like, "Listen, let us help you out." So it was for me, I think, self-studying, group studying, and just I think the advice I just came across was so different than maybe the Reddit advice. But I I will say this, Eric, that, you know, there were people like you in the study group that I absolutely, were like in 170s who took a lot of practice tests. And a lot of it was because they started out with a higher diagnostic. So you don't have to
Mm.
break a wheel that's not broken. And maybe for them, I think exposure to different question types is what they needed. I needed to study. I actually needed to study for the test. What are some of your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because, um, so I've taken the test multiple times. I've taken it 3 times. So for the first one, that was how I studied.
Yeah.
Frankly, I could have done more research. I wasn't aware of, online resources, like 7 Sage. I wasn't aware that there was, um, an efficient way to drill, like, actually. So you're right, in that sense, I had those volumes of prep tests,
Yeah.
and I just thought like, "Well, this is how people study for this test, I suppose," and just bang them out. Um, but when I was, teaching after that, teaching the LSAT, and also just kind of trying to improve my own score, to be very frank, to, like, really consistently aspire one day to 180.
Yeah.
I still don't have, but one day, fingers crossed. I don't have it officially. But I think the drilling, like, really helped me even after already, like, consistently scoring in the 170 to, kind of, refine my process more, and to sort of make sure that when I'm thinking about the test, I'm trying to identify patterns in my own thought process,
Yeah.
kind of reassess them and kind of implement it over and over and over again, right? So putting that into action as many times as I can, even if for a while my score kind of stagnated at a certain point. So for subsequent tests, when I actually walked in on test day the second time, and the third time, I felt it was a much smoother process because I put that sort of work in, which was very very different kind of study than how I did it initially. So part of that again was really just, we'll say, a bit of ignorance on my part. Um, so to be unaware, internet's there. I don't know why I never. I mean, it's a moot point now, but I could have looked it up. It would have been very easy to do. And to the point about Reddit advice, sometimes they would be right about some things. And
Yeah.
if they suggested, hey, go to Seven Sage, or yeah, check out some drilling tools, it would have behooved me to listen to that perhaps.
Yeah. I think that kind of also reminds you different people study differently. I'm an
Yeah.
extrovert. I do well, like obviously I have to study on my own, but then I did really well by finding a group that I could study with. And then also like having a tutor eventually
Mhm,
once I started scoring towards the mid 160s is where I felt like the tutoring was super duper important to get me
mhm.
into 170s. But I think, Eric, to the point, do you study better by yourself? Because I know students a lot like that, and they just do really, really well without a lot of, less distractions around them. Is that you?
I mean, I mainly study by myself. I talk to myself a lot when I study. It's very self-reflective, right? I
Yeah,
do think
yeah.
it's really important to bounce your ideas off someone or something.
Yes.
Right, it's
It
very important because I think regardless of how we study or where you're scoring, it's important to, like, dig into your own thought process in some way, right? And what that looks like for each person can be really different. But we gotta figure out some way of, like, bringing your own thought process out into the open and critically analyzing it and, like, reordering it, which is why I like logic games so much. It's
yeah.
very sad they're gone, because it was very clear how to do that in logic games. And I think for me, it really bled into the other sections. So for me, yeah, it was a lot of, like, monologuing to myself. I
Yeah.
knew a couple people, I do mean couple too, that had, um taken the test before and scored very well. So occasionally, I'll ask them questions. I would go over to their place and I'd say, like, this LSAT question is total BS. I can't believe I got it wrong. And then they point out, like, well, did you think about this?
Yeah.
And then, shamefully I would say, oh, I didn't think about that. Um,
Yeah.
but it's important to be able to get that sort of feedback in some way.
It
I
is.
think that's really how over time we kind of refine our ability.
Yeah. I think kinda like the commonality that I think Eric's talking about, it's like you've gotta, like, really dig deep. You really I
Mhm.
remember, like, writing down a paragraph for the way a sentence was written, and the next
Yeah.
time, I felt like I was a lot faster because So my internal monologue is not that good. I have to write things out to force
Oh, that's good, yeah.
myself to have that internal monologue or to talk to someone who's gonna say, "No, it's not a stupid mistake, Rahela. You really didn't know this." Someone
Mhm,
needs to sometimes. I think I'm very much nicer to myself, and I knew that about myself. So, and I see that in my students all the time, like, "Oh, it's a silly mistake." It's like,
mhm,
no, no, let's actually dig deep in a
mhm.
little bit. Why is it? So you need to have some way of having this like deep monologue. And I think coming back to like if you're in your earlier scores, like maybe for scoring in low 160s or high 150s, you need to have longer monologues with yourself. Like it's going to
Yeah,
take
mhm.
longer for you to finish that for each question you're missing. Whereas if you're like maybe missing a couple of questions, I remember my turnaround, like I was doing more practice tests as I got into 170s because less questions needed that monologue. Um,
Yeah, and not in that way. I think
yeah,
one thing that, um just to speak, on a slightly tangential topic, one
yeah.
thing I really enjoy here about 7 Sage and just talking to other people who score well on the test, my own students, some, um I think is kind of seeing how we all articulate, different aspects of an LR stimulus or a reading comp passage or the question. And you can make it so short and snappy, 2, 3 words. And that's why the right answer is what it is. You can make it long, pages and pages. Sometimes I'll write an email to a student, or when I was studying for the test, yeah, to explain a certain answer choice to myself, just massive paragraphs like, here's how this works and here's how this works, and it reminds me of this. And you mentioned earlier like writing out your own arguments. I did that a lot for flaws, like, this is this kind of flaw, and I heard this yesterday on the news, and I heard it this morning at the grocery store. And the person in front of me in line was like arguing about the bagels, and they just had this really flawed argument about such and such.
Yeah,
And doesn't that remind us of PT such and such, question number this? Uh,
yeah,
and for me, making those connections, and I think that's why, and I think part of it was also because I was doing a lot of PTs, but
yeah,
I think drilling would have helped, and later did really help to kind of make those connections. But however, I think we accomplish that can be very different from person to person. I've seen a lot of people who, drilling fewer questions is better. I see more people who drilling more questions is better. Even with the same amount of time spent per day, the same hour can look really different from person to person.
yeah. I see students all the time who rush with their analytics to be like, "Oh, I need to do more questions," and I'm like,
Right.
"No, just because it's a like conditional logic is your issue. There's like 60% of the questions have conditional.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it you don't have to rush into drilling as well. You have to figure out what is the actual issue, and
Mhm.
you gotta dig deep in and then figure out whether drilling is right, whether review is right, or whether you just need to take more sections, or
Yeah.
just, get more comfortable with that. There is something to exposure. And
Mhm.
so I think, yeah, I think you have to be like, maybe general advice works for everyone, but you have to start also seeing what's going on with you as
Yeah.
well and making your day about what you need versus what is out there.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And when it comes to like, experimenting with that and trying to figure out, like, because I think about my own process and how I work with students through those things. Like, when I'm working with a student and we make a decision to like go back to the core curriculum, right?
Yeah.
Or we make a decision to not use the core curriculum anymore.
Yeah.
I think a big part of that is, first of all, I will say, I think it's really important that we all, to Rahel's point, we all learn our conditionals. Okay, however you do it, you gotta learn your conditionals.
Oh
Okay,
yeah,
I'm a
do
big
not.
conditional person. Yeah, yeah. I love conditionals myself. I love diagram paper. Yes, not everyone has to diagram paper, but you gotta learn. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyways, back to my other point. Yeah. When I think about like how do we make that decision, it's like, oh, I need to go back to the core curriculum. It's really that if you tried something, I think for, and they can be difficult with timelines, right? I know, it's the application season, we've got tests right around the corner. We've got a lot of other things going on. But I think if you're not seeing results and you've exhausted a certain avenue, right? Like you've tried drilling, let's say, a bunch of conditional questions. You've put them all on paper. which you definitely should be doing if you're trying to improve them, I think, initially. And you've done a bunch of them, you're putting in like a couple hours every single day, and we're still running into the same problems.
Yeah.
But of course, making sure we know what those problems are, right? Then I might say, okay, one option might be going back to the core curriculum. But before we do so, where exactly in that process are we, like messing things up? I think a big um, issue that I'd overcome is if I get a question wrong, it's not as simple as just saying, well, just pick the right answer, dummy. It's
Yeah.
a lot more of like, what are like the things to your point about, how are we reading? Is it really a silly mistake? Why is it that I overlooked this word or I underestimated this thing or I made a decision to do, and really sort of like unpacking that either to yourself or to someone else or to writing it out. And thinking after that, you can make a decision about should I change my strategy? Should I change, what I'm spending my day doing? Do I throw out like a certain thing that I've learned, some cool hack I learned on TikTok or through like some cool book I got? And how do I know that it's not working? And I know that's not going to work for me. I think is really making sure that like when you're reviewing in some way, that you're really clear about what those like little moment to moment thoughts were,
Yeah.
which can be difficult to kind of like coax out if you're not talking about it with someone else.
Yeah. To that point, one way, and I love what Eric is saying, like tons was going in my head as Eric was talking, giving such good insights. And it comes down to, like, I've seen students, and I think, Eric, you have too, who think it's conditional or causal, and then I have them do a question. They know conditional reasoning,
Yeah. Mhm.
and it's the way they're reading. They're not
Mm,
reading and analyzing almost like small pieces, so,
mhm.
of course, they're missing little things, which then stops them from going into the higher score.
Yeah.
Then I see people who think, right, like, they're not sure, and then I have them do, I'm like, "Oh, you just need to go back to co-curriculum,"
Mhm,
right? It's taking too long for you to figure out inferences.
mhm.
It's in those review that you figure out, is it a knowledge issue? If it's not, if your blind review score is really high, it's a timing and efficiency issue.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so one thing I used to do is I used to have students before even blind review, strategy blind review.
Mm, mhm.
Right? Like, good habits and, like, reading and analyzing, right? Like, picking and going, like, if you're confident to a certain degree, like, are you doing the things you should be doing? Like, if you hear a bell about a word, did you think about each word that you're reading? If you heard a bell, did you respond to it? Or, how did you analyze that? And then you blind review because so much goes into this test and getting a great score in 35 minutes. Not just do I know it efficiently enough?
Yeah.
And do I have the habits that will get me through this at a great confidence without needing, I don't know about you, Eric, like, 100% for every question is a rarity for me. Under
Yeah, yeah,
time.
yeah.
So like, for me, it's like, all right, is a minute investment enough to go from a 90 to 100? No. Like, I'm not gonna invest that kind of time. So
Mhm.
you have to know, like, what your timing issues are as well. And also things you struggle with. Like, I struggled with art and ethic questions.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
yeah, so I had to read extra about it. Like,
Uh-huh.
it's like strengthening a muscle in gym that's weak,
Yeah. Mhm.
and so you have to also look outside of it. Like, JY constantly just goes into talking about gravity. Why? Because understanding a little bit of context can
Mhm.
make you feel like you can engage with it better. So you just have to dive in, like, really, and not just follow, like, generic advice. A good start, I think, but it's you and the dialogue with you.
Yeah, I think it's really important. There were 2 things I was thinking about as you were speaking, and one of them, well, the other one I've already forgotten. So let's start with the first one. Uh, back to, on reading comps specifically, I think, I use this analogy occasionally, in classes and with students. Um, oh, I remember the other one now. But I'll back to this reading comp thing. Is I think for me, when reading comp is done well, it should feel like you've taken the training wheels off your bike
Yeah.
and you're moving along and you're not falling over, but it's not great. And you're sort of like, you're sort of like wobbling a little, but you're kind of at that level where if you slow down, not like you literally slow down in the reading comp, but
Yeah,
if you change course in some way, you will fall over. But you just got to keep moving, and it's like kind of in your control, but only barely. Ideally, a little bit more than that, but in some fashion, it should feel just a little bit close for comfort in that way. To your point about like, is it worth that time investment?
yeah,
At 90% versus 100, for some people going lower, 80% certainty, 70% certainty, right? It starts to get a little murky.
yeah,
But and that's where like review can be really helpful to say, you know what, statistically, I do well on this question type. I
yes,
feel here 75% chance I got the right answer. But according to my review stats, I do well. So let's keep going, right? Other questions you might say, like statistically, I'm not getting this right. So is it worth my time? How much time should I really spend to like increase it above a 50% chance? How do
yeah,
I even get to a 50% chance? Like, are there little tricks I can do? I will also kind of caveat reading comp for me. I like to read very fast, so maybe that's why it feels that way. Or I'm really barreling, and the passage is sort of I kind of got it, but truth be told, a lot of the details are maybe not in my wheelhouse when it comes to the passage itself. But I do feel like overall trying to kind of push the tempo a little bit, especially if timing is a concern,
yeah,
or if we waffle between answers. Most things it's very difficult and nearly impossible to be 100% confident in. Even if you're scoring very high and like you statistically you've got it right, it's still sometimes difficult to like know that you've got it right. But moving along, I think is knowing how to do that with yourself. Um, is a challenging thing. I always say you can only trust yourself on test day, right? There's no one else there. So whatever you got to do to like get yourself moving and like have your own protocol for what to do, like that's what it's got to be.
I completely agree. And to the point about RC, I actually went to a couple of people, like tutors, and I was like, "How do you feel about RC?" I feel like I am fighting a battle, like coming out of like a harsh battle every time with RC, and I don't feel that way about LR.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh yeah, same, same." So just because I kind of actually did the math, it's 40-second per question for me, right?
Mhm.
Again, it's like my reading speed and what it takes me to do good reading speed. And so I'm basing in a lot of eliminating, right?
Okay.
I kind of have support, but this word makes it wrong. So it's a lot of battles I'm fighting to
Mhm.
get to, right? Finishing. And I rarely ever had extra time for RC. Like it was like and I'm finishing the question and time 35 minutes over, right?
Mhm.
Rarely would I have like 1 or 2 minutes, and that's when I've skipped a question, completely.
Yeah.
So, it was to me the insight to me that I got was you've gotta get comfortable with being uncomfortable and being okay with going for your strategy rather than outcome. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's correct, but strategically, like, this has a way to be correct and this doesn't. I don't care my feelings. This is the one I'm picking. I don't understand this answer, but none of them else work, so I've learned to be okay with it, right? Like what you were talking about, 80%, I learned that if I parallel reason, I have to pick at 75% and go
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because, finishing D&E is adding a minute long,
Mhm.
and it's just not worth that 75 to a minute, minute and a half, especially if I pick A, then I'm investing, like, maybe even 2 minutes depending on what's happening to go from that 80 or 70 to, like, 100, and it's
Mhm.
not worth it to me at that point. So,
Yeah.
you have to learn and you have to look at your analytics because for some students, I've said, "Please don't do that," right? Because you're actually missing then.
Mhm.
And so for that person, maybe that doesn't work. Um, so Eric, all of your insights are amazing. Anything about like, I think we're also talking about the way we take the test. How did you
Mm.
figure out that you don't have to skip? Because I had to figure out I had yeah,
For me, it was. Uh, I can be a very stubborn person by nature,
I
and I
was
think
too.
for me, yeah,
Yeah,
and for me, it was really that. So there were sort of two. I'm not going to call them insights, but observations that I had about myself that made me decide that I really just don't shouldn't skip questions. The first one was every time I tried to skip, I just inevitably I'm still hanging on to that question. It's in the back of my head. I'm still trying to solve it. LR, RC, it's unavoidable. I have a very difficult time kind of moving on, you know, mentally moving on. So it just became a choice of, well, then I guess I can't until I have something selected. And then, a different story about like, okay, how confident do I feel? It doesn't have to be 100, but I have to go through my process. The second one was I did, over time, I did kind of come to the conclusion that if I invest a certain amount of time, I can get there, right? I can get to like 70 or 80% confidence with my answer choice if I spend a little bit more time than I think I should. And then after that, I guess the final step to put it all together in the context of a section, because I was doing so many sections, is like, okay, what does that look like for the other questions then? If I'm going to spend more time than appropriate here, because I'm just not going to skip, I'm going to devote 2.5 minutes, which is a little bit outlandish. It's only question 11. And what am I doing with my life? What does that look like for future questions? What about question 18 or 19? Like, what am I going to do? And to your point about like following your strategies, I think that's really important. And why, the drilling in some ways, or the sections, or going through the core curriculum, making it really clear to yourself, like these are the benchmarks of what I want to do for this situation, for this question type. As long as I hit these markers, or even just most of these markers, I've done enough. We got to move on. And so for me, it's really a matter of like, how long does it take to hit those markers? Maybe just longer than someone else who would also get the question right, but in half the time. But just observing that I can do that, and I know what the markers are. I think that's a really important thing. Figuring out what the markers are, like what am I looking at? How do I know that I can move on now, finally, and pick my answer choice? Uh, I think that's where a lot of people lose time is they're not really sure what they're looking for, and that's when you spend 4 or 5 minutes on an LR question, and you're still not really sure what to do next. Yeah.
Great, great answer. I think I had the opposite where I realized that, you know, I could have gotten a higher score. So this strategy is not
Wow,
great.
wow, mhm.
Like I I almost couldn't move, so I would have to rush the last couple of questions, which tend to be easier. Maybe the question 17 I'm stuck at spending time. That 23 was maybe something I could have gotten correct. So I wasn't at that point good enough to be like, yeah, with that 4 minutes, probably. I was like, well, I could have definitely gotten that 23 and then 24, 25 correct. And so I wanted to be done with the test, I think. I think you were trying to get that 180, which I completely
Still trying to get it, yeah.
well, and I think I was just trying to get into 170s. I was like, well, maybe with
Mhm.
that 3 more points, I could have landed into it with 1 from RC more, like a couple more from there. And so I think that it was like a necessity thing for me to be like,
Mhm.
all right, I've got to clearly this is stopping me. And I think the biggest thing was like my tutor would take the section and I would take the section and then we would compare time. And he skipped a question I spent, like, 3.5 minutes getting correct, and he had a higher score than me because he got to
Mhm.
the end and I did not, and I got that one correct. It wasn't worth it. It
Mhm.
wasn't worth it because now I'm rushing and I'm missing. So I think to me, again, like, you have to look at your test and your blind review score, and you have to do a good job at a blind review, right? I
Yeah.
think a lot of people just kinda, like, willy-nilly just review it. Like, you really
Mhm.
have to and be like, "Well, how can I, based on my skill, which is this question would have taken me 3.5 minutes, how could I have used this time better to maybe get 2 more points? Is there any way I could have gotten a higher score, sacrificing some battles and winning a war?"
Yeah.
That I think that was kind of my approach, was like just
Yeah, it's
yeah,
true. I mean, one thing that analytics does tell us, which is very useful, is the amount of time spent on a question,
yeah,
changing your answer as well. I think that part of analytics is really useful. What we're doing in that time can be a bit trickier, right? So to your point about blind review and being really honest with yourself, to really dig into like what were those 2 minutes like? What were those 3 minutes like? How did we really spend it? That's something that analytics can't necessarily tell you.
yeah,
But I totally agree with your point. Uh, like that's where general advice can be useful because it is true. The hardest questions on an LR section tend to be in those late teens, early 20s range,
yeah,
16 to 21, 22-ish, usually, not always. And then the last couple of questions, some of them are kind of long sometimes. They often throw a parallel in there towards the end. But honestly, they're usually not as bad, right? 3, 4 stars, doable, maybe normal. I usually just use the word. They're very normal questions usually at the
Yeah.
very end. Not always. Don't
Yeah.
quote me on that. But just saying, like overall, it might be worth it, especially depending on where you're losing time, where you're getting questions right or wrong to make that decision. And I think one thing that I think is true about the whole test, I think is especially evident in reading comp, but I think it's also true in LR is, and you can see this, we can see this, from different instructors and different students is, we are all kind of specialists in our own way about what we're really good at the test, and we
Yeah.
can do it really fast and or confidently, and other things that we kind of have to, hack and slash our way through it, and either we use like a very like, you know formulaic approach that we just memorize it brute force. We're like, okay, I'm just going to do it this way because it's going to get me like 85% of this question type right.
Yeah.
But to person, I think kind of recognizing what your strengths are and what you're good at on the test, analytics are pretty good at identifying those things.
Yeah.
And then you can use that to like filter through a section and decide like how am I going to skip or prioritize certain things or spend less time than recommended on a certain question type or more time than recommended question type, and it all kind of comes together later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It really, really does. I think to the point, don't fix what's not broken. A lot of people
Yeah, yeah.
have certain strengths they come in with, and definitely fix what's broken, and also
Mhm.
figuring out what works for you with your goals. That is, I think, different people with different goals means different ways of studying for the test.
Yeah. Mhm.
So you have to really be like honest about that as well, and stick to that, because I think all people just are doing what works for 180 student. And no, if you're in 150s or high 150s and you're trying to get into 160s, then you have a completely different way of approaching it than maybe someone in 170s who's doing more practice tests. So take that into account. But I think, you know, kind of like the blind leading the blind, I think sometimes you do need to ask for advice, right?
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
this is like maybe where like a tutor or a live class or participating in different things can be super helpful, because I also got a lot of bad advice, and it was just saying, "Who told you that?" And I was like, "I don't know. I don't know anything about this test." That's what I'm asking.
I see. Yeah.
I think, like, the things we're saying, they are, if it works for you, definitely, like, apply that, see if it works. Give it a couple of, like, 2 weeks. I think, Eric, what do you
Yeah, that's very important. Mhm.
Yeah, you have to give it time, and you have to just go for it too sometimes. Like, it's really hard to skip, or really hard to also just finish the section, right? Like, whichever one you do, try that, like, just go for it for a couple of times and see how you do. And maybe you'll find even a hybrid, because different people have different needs for skipping or not skipping.
Mhm. Mhm.
Who knows where you fall? Um, but also if you're ever stuck, get help. Like, don't get stuck for too long, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think asking for advice is really important. I really agree with your point about giving it time. Because some things it's not fun. It's a grind. It feels like it's not working, but it just takes a lot of practice and volume, right? And that's where if you talk to a lot of people and most everyone is advising the same thing, even if it's a very painful process for you, it probably kind of has to be done that way. Whereas other things, very different, right? Very different. You might get a lot of different advice, conflicting advice from different sources.
Yeah.
And that can maybe tell you that there's definitely not a one size fits all there. But whatever you try doing, try it at least for a couple weeks. I totally agree. Try it on the easy difficulties and the harder difficulties, and just see like the whole gamut of like, okay, if I really commit to this idea, what does that look like over time? And some of them you might realize you don't need it. You don't need it at all, and it actually makes your score worse.
Yeah.
And other things you might realize over time, it's like, oh, I feel like I understand more. My scores are going up yet, but I'm understanding more. I'm picking up more. I'm a little bit faster. I'm still getting the question wrong, but that can indicate like, okay, something's working. Maybe to your point, we have to add like an additional, so like create a hybrid strategy where we start like this, and then we end the question like this. Or maybe we're just not done kind of fleshing out this strategy that we encountered. So it just takes another couple weeks and maybe another couple weeks. And over time, like that understanding will catch up to getting the question right.
Yeah. Or maybe what was wrong before is not wrong, but it's like a whack-a-mole, right? Maybe something else
Yeah.
wrong. So you gotta I often found that, like, you fix conditional logic, but now we gotta fix the way you're reading. Now we gotta
Yeah, because we get very excited to implement those things we learn, and
yeah,
it's very natural to lose sight of, like, things that we were already doing, identifying the conclusion. I diagrammed all this stuff, I couldn't even tell you what the conclusion is anymore.
yes. I had that
And then
that
yeah,
happened
bring it
yesterday
all.
with students. Super excited to do a really hard question, got the
Yeah.
concept wrong, but then just forgot to, like, analyze which one's conclusion. There were 2 in
Mhm.
there, and I was like, you know, if
Yeah,
that one didn't exist, perfection, you know?
yeah.
So, yeah, it's a hard thing, but it's definitely doable with different strategies and definitely, like, have that dialogue with yourself, and it's almost like life, you have to find what works for you, like,
Mhm,
you wanna fit in when you're a kid, which is good, maybe bad, I don't know, but you are an individual at the end with your strengths, your life,
mhm.
and your weaknesses, and there's a test that you've got to adapt yourself to, but also your strengths are your strengths, so don't lose your strengths too.
Absolutely, and then, one day you'll score well, and you can be on this podcast with your own hot
Yeah,
take about how to study,
yes.
that's different than everyone else, right? But, it really is true.
Yeah,
I really like, just personally, in the live classes, and especially in the live classes, getting to hear from different people about things they learned, some of which very insightful. I'm always learning new things about the test, some
yeah,
of which a little skeptical, not sure that it's a very responsible way. Whoever's passing out this information, I can't remember any of those. I think I blocked them out from my mind. But occasionally I'll get a suggestion from a student's like, "Hey, I heard doing it this way." And I'll think, I mean, credit to you if it's working. I'm not so sure it'll work for me, but that's okay. If it works, and if we know how to like utilize that tool in that way, it's, don't listen to me then. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think that's the first thing I ask, like, "How's your score? Like, is this
Mm,
working for you?"
mhm.
And if it works for this question, is it working overall for other questions?
Yes, very important. Mhm.
I think that's the goal, like, maybe, like, doing a 30% works here, like, 30% understanding, but is that how we wanna do the other questions? Is that
Mhm.
the risk that's acceptable? Sometimes it is, depending on the score.
Yeah.
Alright, Eric, I think we had some good advice. What do you think?
Yeah, it's always insightful. I think it was really interesting hearing your process for review and for for reading comp and skipping questions.
Yes.
It's very relatable, I think, in a lot of ways, especially to a lot of my students.
Yeah. I think I almost, like, fell off my chair when you first said I did a lot of PTs because I was like, that would give me a heart attack.
That's a really don't try this at home kind of thing.
But
For the vast majority of people, I would not recommend it. I really don't. For whoever's listening out there, if it's working for you, my heart goes out to you. You and me, we get along. But most people should not be doing that. Just I
yeah.
got
But I think to the point, I think what I've also learned that, like, and even throughout my studying is different things work for different
Yeah.
people,
Mhm.
and if it's working, don't break it.
Mhm.
See what's not working, and maybe you can utilize that from different people. So, yeah. So, thanks, Eric.
Thank
Do you have
you.
yeah, I think I don't have anything else to add about this topic. Do you have any final words?
No, I mean, I think we've covered most everything. I mean, I could ramble on about stories about students, but I think the point still remains. It's really about what's working for you already, and then making that even better and streamlining it, and the things that aren't working, getting really to the bottom of what exactly about it isn't working. Because a lot of the times, most of it is working. Probably, it's just that like 10-20% that's preventing you from getting to the answer. And sometimes it's on the front end. Sometimes it's at the very finish line, just getting to that right answer choice. So really digging into like what exactly is the problem rather than just saying, I'm just not good at necessary assumptions. Like that doesn't really tell us very much.
Yeah, yeah. Alright, with that said, I highly recommend checking us out. Our co-curriculum is
Mhm.
wonderful, tons of drilling. That's how I got better. Like, I was reviewing initially a lot of the drilling, um, live classes and the study groups. There's a lot happening. Join the live classes. That's how I made
Yeah.
friends. That's how I made friends to study with. You reach out to people who are studying like you. And the courses too. I now that I teach them, I wish I had something like that guiding me as I was
Mm,
studying.
me too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so please check us out. I wouldn't be here like honestly without Seven Sage help. And like that's what I studied with and that's what worked for me. So you should definitely try it out and let us know what you think about the podcast or any other questions you may have. We look forward to it.